and it will actually come through. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to connect with the interviewer on a shared interest. You just have to have done it.
As coaches, we help people define their life's purpose, uncover their true passion, overcome their fear of change, and make a pivot while finding balance in their life.
However, sometimes it's not about making a pivot away from a career or industry you love. It's about finding a better space or pace in which to operate and grow.
Today we're speaking with Wendy Taylor of Taking Charge, and she's not your typical career coach.
Wendy Taylor has a relentless commitment to helping each client identify their unique gifts and value proposition and find a job where they can express their full potential and be well rewarded for it. Wendy brings a rare combination of experience to her practice. She has deep knowledge of human development through every stage of development into adulthood and knows how to guide her clients in developing the specific mindset, traits, and skills needed to succeed in the jobs that will best express their potential. Wendy's clients appreciate that she looks at career design from a whole life perspective. Among other things, she's conducted over 12,000 interviews as a manager, executive, and for a variety of consulting clients. Welcome, Wendy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. So glad you could join us today. And we just like to start out the interview by asking what you're grateful for today.
I am grateful for the month of April. I had more clients get new jobs than I've ever had before. And it was intense because interview processes have changed a lot in the last 14 months. And it was exciting and really, really, really rewarding. And there are a whole bunch of people whose lives are now changing because of making some really good career decisions and landing really good fitting jobs for them and their families.
Wendy, when we hear the term career coach, we often think of resumes, interview preparation, and salary negotiations. And you offer these services. You also coach from a whole life perspective. What does that mean?
Well, I believe that your career makes space for and pays for your whole life. And so from that perspective, your career isn't in a vacuum. It's a huge part of your life, and it certainly funds your life, but it has tremendous impact. So if I look at my favorite testimonials, people talk about being healthier, having stronger marriages, their children getting better grades. All of those things are things that can happen when you make decisions that not only improve your career, but also improve the quality of life for your family. And frankly, that exists even if you don't have a spouse or children, because it affects the rest of your life for people who are single and still have other things going on in their life and other people in their life who are impacted by them making good career decisions. Your career is not in a vacuum. And the ethic of my father, where, well, that's why they call it work, Wendy, is God bless him. We don't have to. We can still be highly disciplined, responsible human beings, and I sure am my father's daughter, without having to have that approach of misery attached to your work, because that spills into the rest of your life.
Yeah, my parents always said work often gets in the way of life.
Yes. And the folks who believe that frequently really struggled when they retired, because they hadn't had time to nurture much of a life outside of work. And those people who transition well into retirement actually have developed and cultivated passions and interests. Ironically, those passions and interests made them perform better in their work life, and they made them more successful at their work and actually make job searches easier too.
I think you touched on something pretty important there, and that's the word passion. And we're fortunate enough right now to be in an environment or a situation where we're actually living our dream, our passion, and we're fortunate enough to be able to do this every day. And it's just been an amazing ride so far. And from this perspective, when you're doing something that you just love to do, it's almost not like work. There's that component of, you have to get things done, but it flows from a different space than when it's just a job.
Yes, yes, that's true. And so the passion is an interesting thing.
This episode of Fierce Planet Adventures podcast is brought to you by Five Mountain Coaching, licensed unbeatable mind coaching, integrated accelerated vertical growth across 5 domains of cutting-edge development designed by retired Navy SEAL Commander Mark Devine. Learn the big 4 skills of mental toughness and resiliency. Discover the 6 pillars of performance. Test your mettle with custom-created crucibles across all 5 domains. Visit fivemountaincoaching.com to schedule your free 1-hour unbeatable mind coaching session. That's the number 5, mountaincoaching.com. Begin your journey to becoming unbeatable today.
So the passion is an interesting thing because passion can show up in a lot of different ways. It can show up in, if you work in the tech world, that you actually are passionate about the kind of technology you're building. It can show up that you're passionate about the customers you're making products for. It can show up that you actually really love leading teams. When I was an executive, 400 people reported to me. And I loved that. And when I became a management consultant, I actually missed all of that mentoring and coaching and leading. I didn't actually miss the pre-termination conversations, but I did miss the good part of that. And that's actually how coaching came back into my life, because I said, wait a minute, let's do all the fun things about being a leader. And that was the beginning of that awareness that this was a piece that was missing for me. But passion can also be your inspiration, or what makes you more hireable because you're more likable, or it can make you perform better in an interview or in an important presentation because you are a human and not a robot, and it comes off, and people hire people they like.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
So, you have a pretty extensive background, both in hiring, consulting. Could you talk a little about what unique perspective you bring to your clients?
Well, first of all, one of my former clients referred to it as she's been on the other side of the table. So I have really grounded information on what the other side of the table is looking for. And that is super valuable. So I understand the process. I understand the strengths and weaknesses of the process because I've taught hundreds of people how to conduct interviews and how to build good interview processes, and even scoring rubrics to compare candidates, or taught people that the numbers are a great tool, but there's an emotional component to hiring. Sometimes that was rather shocking to them to learn that. So when it comes to my clients, I understand that really, really well. I prepare them for someone who's a good interviewer, and then I prepare them for what I consider one of the worst questions you can get asked. And so they're ready for that because that worst question is asked about 70% of the time. So that experience just grounds that. And it's there are an awful lot of people in the career coaching business who have a piece of the puzzle that they know really well. They might be contingency recruiters, and they've spent their life reading resumes, and they have really strong opinions about what makes them want to give a resume to one of the clients they have a contract with. And they know what will show up and make those clients say, yes, I'll talk to that person, because those recruiters are paid when somebody gets hired, not by the candidate, by an employer. So they have that narrow perspective, whereas I understand what the people looking at your resume, and more importantly, your LinkedIn profile, are looking for. But I also understand a broader context of that. And I understand successful journeys and careers. And I understand managing upward, or influence management, where you are responsible for the performance of a team, but none of those people work for you. So it's a much broader context because of my real world experience, and the fact that I have some accomplishments also. And so that helps people have a partner who really understands the entire journey they're on, not just a little piece of the puzzle.
You mentioned the emotional component of hiring, And I suspect that there's also an intuitional component to that. And what I mean by that is, no, whichever side of the table you're on, as the interviewee or the interviewer, sometimes you see that what's on paper and it all looks really, really good, but the person shows up, or you show up to an interview and you just don't get the same sense of what's on the paper. And I guess the question I have for you is, when you're preparing your clients for that, for an interview, do you take into consideration that aspect, or as an interviewer, um, how does that show up?
That's a great question. So I had a team that I taught how to build their interview process as a consultant, and they were so good at all the paper stuff and the scoring stuff, and they had a great discipline and a great system. But when they made hiring decisions, they basically said, she's a 3.2 on a level 5 scale and a 4.5 on a level 4 scale. And so we're going to offer her this salary and this equity. And that was the conversation. And I never could get them beyond that conversation. That being said, with my clients, we go in knowing what they're looking for, how they're evaluating the company they're interviewing with. And we go in with questions, and we go in with usually 5 questions. The first 2, you really want to make sure you get a chance to ask. And if you have the opportunity, you ask the rest. So we make sure that we're actually, to be perfectly honest, scoring them. So all those scoring rubrics I built for all those clients. Now my coaching clients are actually evaluating employers, and some of that is very emotional stuff. Some of that is very intuitive and things like that. And then when it comes to preparing, that's really amazing. I call it the inner game. And admittedly, I'm a sports fan, so I can talk about baseball until the cows come home. And so I use baseball for part of the analogy. But the first piece is that's where passions and interests come in, because you are going to come off more likable if in the last 3 days before that interview, you've done one of the things you love to do. And it will actually come through. You don't have to talk about it. You don't have to connect with the interviewer on a shared interest. You just have to have done it. And you will actually appear warmer and more likable. That's super. So my introverts, the people kind of sound like a robot because their voice doesn't have inflection. Like my voice has tons of inflection. But there are people who speak in monotones and sound like a robot or some form of AI. Those people need some warming up. And by doing the thing that they love, recently a client of mine, he loves making custom cocktails. And so since he didn't believe he could gather his friends together to do that, and he had a big meeting, what did he do? He did a Zoom meeting, making a new cocktail with his friends, and was so much better than he'd ever performed in a situation like that. The piece, though, that is actually the most important is that every question that you get asked in an interview, I liken that to a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. And what you want to do is you want to have a practice that slows that pitch down so you can see the beautiful red seams on the baseball. Brilliant. And that is mind, body, spirit. There's some kind of practice that most people have. My Californians, it's usually yoga. Yoga, meditation, and hiking are their big 3, although I love my surfer. And then people in other parts of the country, there might be some religious practices. There might be other types of outdoor activity practices. Whatever it is, we do it the morning of, unless you're a night owl and it's a first thing meeting, and then you do it the night before. And when you do that, those questions will come at you more slowly. You'll be able to see them and position it. And then to continue my baseball analogy, then you can hit it out of the park.
Wow. Where were you when I was in a different career?
I don't know.
I got to tell you, I am horrible at doing job interviews, and being on the hiring side was a lot easier for me. But I'm totally one of those people that just get super anxious and are focusing more on how I'm showing up than really answering the question. And why is that interview process so difficult and so anxiety causing for most people?
Well, for one thing, you don't feel like you have any power or control. And most of us are not extreme extroverts who can talk to anybody about anything at any time with great confidence. That's certainly not me. Um, so for those of us who are not extreme introverts and not extreme extroverts, which is a lot of the population, we feel comfortable when we're in control. And so probably leading this podcast is less scary to you than if you were guesting like I am, because you know exactly what you're going to ask me, right? And I kind of have an idea, but I'm not actually in control of the questions being asked. So there is something to do with that. And so building that, I once asked a client recently who engaged me simply to do interview prep. And I asked her, who is the one person in your life who makes you feel like you're the best person they know? It just makes you feel like a really great, confident being. And she said, my 2-year-old. And she said, I know most 2-year-olds love their mothers, but there's something about her. I feel like I am this amazing person when I'm with my 2-year-old. So what we did is we built practices into her preparation so that when she was with the interviewer, she was thinking of the 2-year-old. So that was really helpful. And she did get the job, and they are leaving California and moving to Texas. They have bought the land and they're building a home. She got a 30% raise and is moving to a place where that money is going to go way further. So it was closer to doubling her income.
Oh, spectacular.
Yeah, I know. And a much better place for her daughter to grow up too.
Oh, yeah. Wendy, so we talked a bit about passion already, and after hearing you talk about what you do with your clients, you have a real passion for this. What started you off on this path?
That's a great question. So when the tech startup where I was the VP of operations got bought, I stuck around for 18 months, learned a whole lot about big corporate America. And I was given an outplacement package where I got to work with one of the better outplacement firms in the country. And they put all of the executives, and I had made VP at 33, so I was one of those executives, in a group program. And we got together every other week and talked about our job searches and supported each other. I was in my mid-30s. Most of the people in that room, since they were executives, were in their 40s and 50s, and even a few early 60s. I became the social media expert for the group. And I came to learn this relatively brand new technology called LinkedIn. And I taught all these people who were my seniors how to use this technology, and started having people come to me wanting to pay me to help them use LinkedIn for a job search. And in fact, one of those men paid me to come into a company who they had decided, and this was a long time ago, so they were a little ahead of the curve, to leave, once again, the leaving California story, and move out of state. And so anyone who didn't want to leave California, they gave them all sorts of services to help them prepare for job search. And I taught workshops on LinkedIn. But I quickly learned that you can't use that tool effectively unless you know what it is you want to do next and what that audience is looking for. And that's when I began building the entire process, the entire system that I have. That it is a system, but it's not very cookie cutter, because it wouldn't be effective if it was cookie cutter. So there's a structure and a process and a proven thing that works, but there's also here's how we do it for you because of who you are. You get nervous in this setting. You thrive in that setting. This is how we're going to approach that. So yes, so that's how that started. So it all started in 2003 when I left that company.
Nice. One of the things that really jumped out for me there in that story was you don't have a cookie cutter approach. And I think with my experience with the coaching industry and the success industry is there's a lot of formulaic products out there that don't really take into account the individual. So that's really powerful, right? And
yes,
that's that's where a really powerful, successful coach, a good coach, is going to help somebody really dive into the steps that they need to take individually, not just as somebody out there looking for a job.
Exactly. And there are a few reasons for it. So my first career was in teaching. And I know enough about working with children to know that cookie cutter approaches do not usually work with adolescents either. We just don't always have environments that allow for individualized learning, but we all know that that would actually be much more effective. You could get a kid who isn't a strong writer to be much better about writing if you have them first do a video blog about their favorite topic and then get them responding to blog posts. And I'm actually quoting a ed tech company that did exactly that, that I consulted with. But when it comes to what I do, therefore, I know that it won't work, but I also would be really bored if if that's how I was doing things. I appreciate the fact that there are people who like certificates and credentials, and then there are people who like to run businesses where then they have a whole bunch of people following a system. And I can understand that. That makes sense to me. And there are lots of worlds in which a certain amount of scripting might make sense. But let's be honest, if you call a call center because you need help from that company for that call center, and they're following a script, how often do you actually get your need met? Well, not very often. And that's about something as basic as my iPhone crashed. Well, then what happens if it's something as meaningful and valuable and mission critical as your career? So the systemic approach, or here's the one right way you write a resume, and here's the one right way you do a LinkedIn profile, and this is the only way you approach an interview, and it, frankly, it's not going to work, and it doesn't make a lot of sense, but sometimes it feels soothing to people. It feels like there's an answer. So sometimes people will talk to me and go, oh wow, I'm going to have to do work, and there's a process, and she's got a track record of success, but it doesn't sound as simple as put on your shoe, lift the lace on the left and cross it with the lace on the right, and oh my God, this scares me. And so for those people, they're pretty attracted to the other. It just isn't as likely to work. That's all.
What jumped out for me there, Wendy, is that there's a bit of confirmation bias that maybe goes on with people who really like who are attracted to the cookie cutter approach. Yeah. Something familiar, it confirms what they've been told throughout their career, but also that it's not easy, right? This is not an easy process, and it's not meant to be. It shouldn't be. And when you lean into it and you do the work that's necessary to land that new position that you really want, I mean, you've gone through the steps of identifying your ideal companies and researching them. Take it all the way to home plate, right? Round the bases, and doing the work is super important. I mean, that's where the difference between average and exceptional comes in.
It is, and you'll be so much more happy, and you'll have made a decision that actually sets you up for the job after this one. You will thrive in the job. It will fit. It won't be one of those jobs where it feels like your right arm and your left leg are completely not necessary to that company, and you're hobbling around on one leg with one arm because they just don't care about those whole chunks of what you bring to the table. An awful lot of people are stuck in jobs like that, and they keep making those decisions. And once they've gotten to a point where they say, okay, this isn't working anymore, then they're a little bit more open to someone who says to them, stop sending out resumes, stop applying for jobs. That's, so
nice. Many of your customers presumably are high performing, high achieving professionals that are competitive and experienced enough to land any job that they apply for. What do you find that prevents someone like that from landing their ideal position?
A couple things. One is you can't actually discipline your way through a job search if your idea of discipline is just to apply to X number of jobs each week and track it. There are an awful lot of wonderful, highly disciplined people, my sisters and brothers in the good, responsible kids club, who actually who actually really, I just had someone write to me this morning. My wife and I talked when I'm not going to work with you. I just need to focus more on my job search. Well, good luck. But the reality um, is that people really need to be encouraged to try something new, because the reality is that most people, when applying for jobs, no matter how wonderful they are not actually going to get very far with most of those. And that's people who have the flawless set of experience that is a perfect match for the job. And guess what? There are an awful lot of talented people who don't have exactly the 5 things that companies looking for. And so, in fact, applying for the jobs will totally be a disaster because they've done a little of this and a little of this. Or it's like a long time ago, I interviewed to build a call center for a company selling wine online. I love wine. I love wine country. I had a wine cellar in my house. Not like a fancy schmancy rich person wine cellar, but like a corner of my basement was perfect for storing wine. And I had built call centers for tech startups. So like I really knew how to do what this job was. And they decided to hire someone who had once walked through a call center and was a sommelier, because that's what they were comfortable with. That's what they knew. They knew sommeliers. They knew wine experts, because everybody building that company was a wine expert. What they needed was a call center expert passionate about wine. And their external recruiter, the headhunter they'd hired, said to me, Lordy, they needed you, but they were going to go with what was comfortable. Well, that's still happening. And that was a long time ago. And it happens to my clients every day. And so that's why the applying piece, even with people with amazing backgrounds, doesn't always work. I was their perfect candidate, but they didn't know it.
Yeah, so people have physical training coaches, people have emotional coaches. Um, the benefit of a coach can bring is helping people see the label on the outside of their bottle, right? We can't see what we can't see, and that's the benefit of a coach, right? Is helping you see the things that you want and that you need, and finding a different path or a different way to get there that maybe you haven't considered yourself. And so, yeah, that's what resonated to me with what you just said.
Yeah, yes, that's really true.
And I imagine oftentimes salary and benefits are the main considerations for somebody seeking a new position. And I think you touched on this a little bit here in the beginning of our conversation, but what other factors should they consider?
First of all, the fit. So the fit is a couple things. The fit is culturally, does my communication style fit in? Does what I bring to the table, both in my work style and my work experience, will this really be valued? The size and stage of the company can actually, there we go, developmental again, the size and stage of the company can actually affect things. So I am someone who loves to walk into chaos and create order. If the order is already there, I'm bored out of my mind. And if it's all chaos all the time, so there's a stage in the life of a company where they desperately need people like me. There are people who thrive in the chaos and like the risk of an early stage company. There are people who need the structure of a big organization. I have a client like that right now. And so that's what works for them. So we look at all of those components. We also look at some demographic things. So say, for example, in Silicon Valley, they're not really keen on people over 50 there. So if you are 45 plus, we make sure there is somebody with gray hair on the leadership team. If you're a woman, we make sure there's someone who is not running HR or customer service who is a woman on the leadership team. Because there are a couple things that are pretty typical in Silicon Valley. So they'll put women in those two roles, but there won't be women in any of what's considered the meaningful roles. Now, I would beg to differ that employees and customers might actually be important, but that's another argument. So there are all different kinds of things we look at to make sure, although I will tell you, by the way, that I've had 32-year-olds tell me they will never work for a CEO under 35 again. So the age thing isn't necessarily only if you're old, there needs to be somebody old there. But the point to all of that is there's really simple check the boxes things to look at. And then there are things that are much more cultural that you have to dig into and understand what is their approach to this. And it's not as simple as agile versus waterfall, which are two ways to build software. It's not as simple as it's a big corporation, therefore it's bureaucratic, but I'm really good at politics. It can be much more nuanced than that. And so we always have our somewhere between 3 and 10 criteria that we're looking for and we're evaluating. And so our goal is 2 offers so that we're actually comparing. And sometimes there'll be the offer with lower salary. And then there's also things like benefits. My favorite is paternity leave. First of all, I work with a lot of men who would like to be more engaged in their children's lives than their fathers were. And there are an awful lot of companies that do not welcome that. So even if you've had all the children you're going to have, if you see a company with paternity leave, what that tells you is they're putting their money where their mouth is, that they believe men can and should be involved in their children's lives. And if that's important to you and you're a man, then that's actually really a huge criteria. So we use that as a litmus test, A, for women's advancement, and B, for men being able to be engaged in their children's lives. And that was probably an argument you've never heard on the subject of salary and equity before.
Not at all. No. Oh, that's amazing. So changing topics just a little bit,
Yeah.
Besides, working with your clients, where do you like to focus your time and energy?
So I am passionate about baseball. I've kept score at every game I've been to since 1979. My dad was an actuary, so we were 2 math geeks and 2 history geeks. We watched the game by writing it down with numbers. And I still love to do that. And I still love watching baseball. I actually have what I call my all Wendy league of 5 teams. And at the moment, the Giants are at the top of my all Wendy league and the Baltimore Orioles at the bottom. And so we have a nice orange and black sandwich with 3 teams in between. But I'm also classical choral soprano. So I sing in previous times. I've sung in church choirs. I've sung in community choirs. And I played the piano seriously as a kid, but now it's much more about just vocal practice and rehearsals, although a good Bach invention is a great stress reducer. And then I actually do have a yoga practice. I have one of those bodies that thrives on mellowing exercise as opposed to intensifying exercise, because as you can tell, I have a ton of energy. and
energy.
And that helps balance it out. Well, and the yoga probably helps with that too. But so those are big, and I'm a huge cook. So I'm a really serious home chef. So I really do enjoy that.
Nice. What's a dinner salon? I don't think I've heard that term before.
So I love to entertain and I love to bring people together. And I think of, history geek, 18th century France. So in 18th century France, the women who had any power did one of 2 things. They ran an abbey or they gathered people of means with artists or philosophers or writers. And so basically they threw parties where musicians came and performed, or artists featured their work, or writers shared their work. My gatherings are usually not quite so much about the arts, although on a few occasions they have been. They're typically more about people in different areas of life And what I think about is matching. And so I'll say, I want to invite this person, and his wife is really into this completely unrelated thing to what he's into. And I know this person she'd enjoy meeting. And then that becomes my two themes. And then I make people change seats in between courses so they get to meet different people, which I myself would find incredibly stressful if I was the guest at the dinner party. But thankfully, my guests tolerate that pretty effectively. And I'm really good at handling every possible dietary thing. Vegans are my least favorite to cook for, but I can handle everything. I kind of like butter, so it's a little hard for me to make you yummy food without butter. So when I do olive oil tastings, it's like,
Better be good.
Yes.
Sounds like a pretty fun experience, actually.
Yes, and it's usually most of them have been about 16 people. That's a really good number. Yeah.
Oh wow, yeah.
That sounds very intriguing. Yeah, and a little overwhelming. I'm more of an introvert, so yeah, but something to lean into.
Yes, it would require some leaning. But
like
actually,
a family dinner here.
what I tend to do is if I know in advance about someone being introverted, I make sure I sit them next to people who are they've been to my home multiple times. They're incredibly warm. They're incredibly engaging, that kind of thing. And that tends to really help with the comfort level. So
When should someone start considering looking at hiring a life or a career coach?
So one of the things we have to remember is that the duration of time in a job, the rules have changed dramatically. So, well, first of all, obviously, if you've already lost your job, yes, yesterday. If your boss has left the company and there's a whole lot of changes going on, yesterday. If you've been there even 18 months and you're really miserable, you're not valued, you can't do what you want to do, or it's not the job you were told it was going to be, start now. Start before you're desperate. If you're already desperate, then yesterday. If your spouse is starting to express some concern, start yesterday. All of those kinds of things. But the reality is we have this belief from our parents' careers that you're supposed to stay somewhere a certain amount of time. And what is now considered acceptable, and this does vary based on field, but people are allowed far more career transitions. First of all, most of us have multiple careers. So I guess I'm on career number 4 or 5, and I'm 54. So there's that, but there's also the job changes within, which is typical and considered normal. So I just spoke to someone earlier today who spent 2.5 years at his current company, and he's ready to make a change, and it's a good time. That's a good time. 2 years is totally enough time in that job. And sometimes it's worth it to get out before you've hit 2 years. And by the way, if you know you want to get out, you start before the 2 years anyway, because it's not a snap your fingers magic wand. I have superpowers, but I don't actually have a functional magic wand. So
that's interesting to me. Looking back at my career path, the jobs that I've had, I'll call them jobs. I took that into consideration, right? The old paradigm or the old thought of you have to stay X number of years in a position. And looking back, I really stayed in some jobs way too long, right? And wasn't happy, but was thinking about how I look on that resume to another hiring manager. But then I look at it from a different perspective now, where when I was hiring people to come into to asset protection positions, and they had jumped from position to position every 6 to 8 months or a year. I took a look at them and said, boy, am I going to spend a lot of time working with this person, integrating them into the culture just to have them jump ship and move on really quickly. So is there a balance?
There is a balance, and that's a huge red flag. So in fact, if you're doing the interviewing, you're looking at one of the things you need to find out is why they left each job. First of all, people might spill the beans, certainly if they're not my client. They might spill the beans about why they left each job in a more revealing way than they should be, and will actually reveal that they haven't grown up, that the problem is them, that every boss is a problem. And you can start hearing these stories about these problem bosses and realize those problem bosses sound like you and go, oh, okay, no, thank you. Now, the flip side of that is depending on what kind of work people do, if they work in environments where companies come and go, companies can lose funding, and it has nothing to do with you, and that's okay. But you listen for, when you're doing the interviewing, stories about personal responsibility, stories about not bad mouthing previous bosses. Of course, you also can ask best and worst boss questions. And then if their worst boss sounds more like you than their best boss, you know they're not a good fit either. But yeah, 6 to 8 months is not good. I talked to someone recently who hasn't been in his current job for real long and said to me he wanted to talk about getting back to work that was more meaningful. His early career work had been tremendously meaningful. He developed products for people in developing nations that had significant impact. It was wonderful. And now he's at a world-class consulting firm doing something that most people can't do because they don't have an Ivy or Stanford MBA. And that's all wonderful. But it turns out that he's miserable enough at 9 months, he's interviewing. And he will have to, until about 10 years go by, explain that short departure for a long time. That's just the way that's going to be. And hopefully he will do that well. And if everything he's done since has been meaningful on purpose, and the people he's talking to are in that space, then he's going to be just fine. So some of it is about thinking about that. And it does depend on what you do. There are areas of the economy where 5 years is the right number. And in others, I would say the shortest tenure is tech, and it's 2. 2's fine. But other parts of the economic sectors, it would probably be more like 3 to 5, a little bit longer.
So LinkedIn, right? That's a real powerful platform right now. And I guess, how large of a role does that LinkedIn play for clients in their self-marketing efforts?
It is huge. So a whole bunch of things. One of my success stories from April, in fact, the last offer earned in April from my clients, she had landed every job through face-to-face networking in her career. She's a CFO. And I told her that she really did need to get on LinkedIn. We were very thoughtful about how we presented her. And she was actually found on LinkedIn by the CEO of her new company. And her tagline is why the woman talked to her. She happens to be an extroverted CFO. And we, oh my goodness, and I'm going to forget what she called herself. But it was so powerful that this woman, this CEO reached out to my client. Oh, hi, here it is. Charismatic CFO leader with a strategic and collaborative mindset.
Brilliant.
Nice.
And that's actually how she got to be in the running for her dream job. So the reality is that it's a branding thing. In her case, that's actually purely what it was. It's also recruiters finding you because we keyword load. We know, because I've taught a lot of recruiters how to do this, we know what good recruiters are doing who have your dream job. So we take some dream job postings. I pull out the keywords that a good recruiter would use to find people for those jobs. We keyword load into your profile. We tell an about story that explains anything that isn't in a straight line on your resume, that demonstrates your passion for your work, that does tell a little bit about what you do when you're not working, because people hire people they want to celebrate the end of the work week with on Friday evening. And I know that sounds like a popularity contest, but it's reality, so we may as well be likable. And then on top of all of that, then there's you can use LinkedIn as a door opening process. I think of it as the Rich Daddy Network. So back in the day, people graduated from college, and if they had a Rich Daddy called his golf buddy and said, my kid's graduating next month. Can you give him a job? Dude says, sure, I'll give him a job. Will you help my nephew? He's graduating next month. Bam, your career is launched. Well, most of us don't have rich daddies. And so LinkedIn allows us to create a door opening network for ourselves. What it does is it shows you not just who you know, which to some degree you probably know who you know and where they've worked, maybe, but it shows you who they know. And so instead of going to your friends and saying, I need a new job and I am on the track to become a CFO someday, we'll just go with the finance theme. And do you know of any jobs? Well, your friends are like, oh God, I don't know any jobs. And then they run and hide from you and they feel bad. Whereas if you know you want to work in a certain size credit union, you look at who knows people working in certain size credit unions and you say, oh, here's a person I should be talking to at this credit union and my college roommate knows them. I asked college roommate for an introduction. Bam. And you make it easy for your friends to help you. Basic human psychology. It worked before COVID. During COVID lockdowns, it has been so powerful because people are looking for more meaning, more connection. And we're making it simple for your network to help you. And you're doing all the homework because it's your job search. It's not their job search. And so that is actually originally was the whole purpose to LinkedIn. Now, obviously, the money making is job postings and what they charge companies for recruiter licenses, which is a significant investment, and now sales organizations, and they have the sales product. But the original purpose was to build a map of your network. And back then it was, because I've been a member since 2003, 2004, back then it was not just who you knew and who they knew, but the third one out. And you could actually do requests all the way out to there, which was really wild. And I got job opportunities doing that in 2004. So, yeah, so LinkedIn is incredibly huge. And there's really not a space in which it isn't valuable. Certainly classic W-2 business jobs was the first. And when I got on it, I'm from the East Coast. I'm in California. And all my friends in the East Coast are like, ooh, this LinkedIn, no, my connections come from the golf club. Okay, yes. Well, yeah, but the golf club's kind of limiting. How many people live in your community? What about the people who have powerful jobs that don't play golf? Even in the 80s and 90s, there were people who had power who didn't play golf, I'm told. But at this point, even academia, even law, even architecture, just so many different fields that you wouldn't think of, nonprofit, you need to be on LinkedIn.
Awesome. One of the questions we had, you've already answered. So I'm going to flip the question and say, what's the biggest mistake you see people make on LinkedIn?
Not choosing their background photo wisely, or I literally had a woman say to me, I don't have any bullets under my jobs because if somebody wants that information, they'll ask for my resume. So they just had title, company name, duration, no explanations. That's all that territory that could have been keyword loaded with their accomplishments, strong active verbs, measurable outcomes for 80% of them. Most of us work in fields where we can actually measure the outcomes. And so there needs to be a number. And it varies. Some people it's down around 60% is possible. Most people about 80%. She just missed on all that opportunity, all that real estate, because she still believed in the power of the resume. The LinkedIn profile is a resume on steroids. It's a resume plus. Your background photo should reinforce who you are as a human being. Your professional headshot should reinforce how you present and how you show up. You're not at a wedding. You're not in a prom dress. You're looking professional. And then your about section should tell things. Your tagline should tell things. Every piece of that is valuable real estate. If you've volunteered, you want to make sure that's there, particularly if you volunteered in non-religious circles, or if you are in a part of the country where religious circles are actually powerful for your network, right? Because there are plenty of parts of the US where that's true. But if you are in a super secular market, you might want to focus on more secular volunteering is what you disclose. But whatever that is, all of that is super important. But I would say that prospective client that said to me, I don't have bullets because I know people who don't do that. And apparently she thought these people were very wise. And if people want that information, they'll ask for my resume. If people have to ask for your resume, you've already lost.
Well, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expert knowledge. How can people find you? Where can people find you?
Probably the best place for them to find me is on LinkedIn. So I was the first Wendy Taylor on LinkedIn in April 2004. And so I am linkedin.com/in/Wendy Taylor. No numbers, no middle initial, because I was the first one, so I got to grab that. And you will see Taking Charge in the background. It will talk about experience and accomplishments, and there'll be pictures of me leading jobs and jazz classes at my church. And so I kind of look, I've got different classes, but so that's how you know you found me. You could also just go on LinkedIn and search Wendy Taylor, Taking Charge, and I'll pop right up.
Awesome. Thank you again. We appreciate you for being on our podcast, and we appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you so much. It was such a pleasure getting to speak with both of you. Thank you so much.